Welcome. My name is Elaine Manley, and I'm the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Cupertino and Sunnyvale. Today's forum, COVID in Schools, will run about 90 minutes, and it is being recorded. Before we get into today's topic, COVID in Schools, wanted to just say a few comments about Zoom webinar. As you can see, the audience will be in listen-only mode. The panelists will be on video as well as the moderator. If you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A function. As time permits, we will do our best to take your questions. We've gathered quite a few questions in advance of this webinar, but if we do receive questions, we will gather them by topic and consolidate them that way. If you have any technical questions or issues, please send an email to techsupport@lwvcs.org. This session is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be on our website at lwvcs.org in the next few days. Now, a little bit about the League, if I may say. The League has been empowering voters and defending democracy for over 100 years now. We were founded in 1920, about 6 months before women won the right to vote in the 19th Amendment. I want to say that the League never supports nor opposes political parties nor candidates. We have two different corporations. One is on education, which is what we're doing tonight. The other on advocacy is when we have studied an issue and taken a position and we choose to take action or not. But once again, tonight's forum is completely just citizen education. Now, a couple of things about the election, since we're right in front of election season. Hope you don't mind, we're going to mention a couple of changes that have happened in California. We experienced it in March and it is continuing in November. When you get your ballot, I was just going to point out, when you get your ballot, pay attention to how you are listed in the ballot. Does it have your first name and last name, or does it have your first, middle, and last name? You'll want to sign the back of your envelope for your ballot the way you registered to vote. Be sure to date it. You could also sign it based on your driver's license because they do have to compare your signature. So once you've completed that ballot and you've put it in your envelope, there are 3 ways that you can deliver it. One is you can vote by mail. As you know, we've heard a few things about the mail being a little slower than it has been in the past. So we would encourage you to make sure if you are going to vote by mail, mail it in earlier than normal, maybe like by October 27th. The second choice would be put it into a ballot drop box, and these will be in front of the libraries. And the third way is a vote center, and these are replacing the polling places. So the vote center is where you can take it in. There'll be a person there. You can vote in person, or you can just take your completed ballot, have them look at the back to make sure you've completed it properly, and then turn it into their ballot drop box. So 3 ways that you can turn in your ballot. All right, so then you may be asking yourself, well, how do I find that vote center? So there's good news. It's a very simple thing to do. And on the next slide, you could see the QR code, as well as a URL that you can go to. And with this, you just type in your address and you click the go button, and it will pull up the vote centers that are nearest you and even tell you how far away they are. It'll also show you where the ballot drop boxes are. So very handy resource that our Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters created. So they did a very nice job. Now, as far as voter registration, on the next slide, you can see the QR code. And the website is registertovote.ca.gov. Fantastic site. If you have not registered, please do so immediately. Click on the register to vote, or if you know somebody that hasn't registered, it's a great way to do it. And you can also check your registration status, and we would strongly encourage you to do this. Some people received their ballots from a different party than they expected back in March. So the best thing you could do is be proactive. Click on this link, check your registration status to make sure you are registered for the party you want to be registered for. If you click on that and you enter your data and you get this retry button that you see at the bottom of your screen, that means there's a problem in the system, and we would encourage you to go ahead and register to vote again. It's not a problem to re-register. They'll have your latest address information. All right, so the next slide has some great information on what's on your ballot. As you can imagine, the ballot's a little daunting. There's going to be quite a bit on the November ballot. And votersedge.org is a fantastic website. It's a joint venture between MapLight, which studies the money behind measures, the propositions, and the League research done by the California level at the state level on all of the different ballot measures. So you would go into this website, votersedge.org, or use this QR code that you see on the screen. You enter your address and it will pull up your ballot. Just a wonderful resource for you. So with that said, enough about the election. Now we can get on to our next slide, and it says, why are we putting on this webinar? Well, turns out 97% of California's 6 million students are experiencing distance learning, and everyone recognizes this is a significant change for the children, the parents, the teachers, the faculty, all of us. It's definitely having a big impact. So we thought this would be a very appropriate time for us to go over this topic and cover it in great detail. And I'm pleased to say on this next slide, you're going to see what a fantastic panel we have together. If I may briefly explain a bio on each of our speakers, and their photos will show up soon, or their videos will show up as we call their names. So the first one is Juan Pedraza Arellano, and he is a senior at Fremont High School. He's currently the student board representative for the Fremont Union High School District. He is also a member of the COVID-19 task force for the district that worked on planning and improving upon emergency distance learning during the spring and summer. Welcome, Juan. Our next one is Polly.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Our next one is Polly Bovee. Polly has served as superintendent of the Fremont Union High School District since 2006. She's created many of the district's alternative education programs that serve students with special needs. She's developed an open and collaborative approach to negotiations with collective bargaining units, and she spearheaded the district recovery from the financial downturns of 2002 and 2003, as well as the 2008 through 2013 period. Delighted to say that Polly is a member of our local league. Welcome, Polly. Next, we have Peter Chu. He is a veteran Silicon Valley entrepreneur, a venture capitalist, and a former executive in companies such as Oracle and Broadvision. He's a graduate of the California's public K-12 school system and passionate about community service. He and his wife have been active school volunteers since their children started in the CUSD schools and through FUHSD. Peter is serving a second term on the site council at Cupertino High School and has recently participated as a parent representative on the district's COVID task force. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Elaine. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Great. Our next panelist will be Lori Cunningham. Lori is currently serving as the board president for Cupertino Union School District. Lori grew up in Sunnyvale, and she attended West Valley Elementary, Cupertino Junior High, and Homestead High. She is a member of our league, thank you, Lori, and serves on the league's county education committee. And she currently has a child in CUSD. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you.
Excellent. Next, we have Michael Gallagher. Michael is the superintendent at Sunnyvale School District. He's been committed to equity through service in the public schools of Santa Clara County for more than 30 years. He came to Sunnyvale in May of 2009 as the assistant superintendent of human resources, and he also serves as a board president of the Sunnyvale Community Services and is president of Sunnyvale Rotary. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Next, we have Jason Heskett. Jason graduated with a master's in education, adapted PE, and special education from San Jose State University. Jason has been an FUHSD teacher for the last 20 years. He's currently a special education teacher at Cupertino High School. And for the last 10 years, Jason has led the 500 Fremont Union High School District teachers in his role as president of the local teachers union. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you.
Great. Next, we have Michelle Maginot. She is the president of Sunnyvale School District and has been a Sunnyvale resident for more than 30 years. She's attended Cumberland Elementary School, Sunnyvale Middle School, and Fremont High School. She has 3 children currently in the Sunnyvale School District. Welcome, Michelle. And last but not least, we have Kelly Ye. Kelly is a doctor at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. She moved to the Bay Area in 2000 for her anesthesia residency and fellowship. She joined the staff at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center in 2005 with a subspecialty in pediatric anesthesia, which unfortunately means she has had extensive experience with COVID patients. She's the mother of a 3rd grade daughter and a first grade son. both in the Cupertino Union School District. I'll now turn it over to Tracy, who's going to moderate this panel.
Elaine, thank you very much. My name's Tracy Edwards, and I'm the other co-president for the League of Women Voters at Cupertino-Sunnyvale, and let me extend my welcome to all the panelists and attendees. We're going to just jump right into it. This first question is going to go to Michael and then Polly. Would each of you describe the current operating status in each of your school districts? So Michael, to you first.
Okay, I'll go first. Thank you. So I think by that you mean how are schools currently operating, how are classes? Good. So we began the school year with 2 different programs. We actually spun up a brand new independent study program right before the school started. So that's an option for some parents or some students, and some 250 or so students are enrolled in an independent study program. And then our other program, which the vast majority of our students are enrolled in, is virtual school. And so that program is all online. We currently don't have any in-person instruction. It's structurally looks a lot like a typical school or a typical school day, except that all the classes are online. So students are assigned to teachers as they normally would be in the elementary school, at the same class size ratios in elementary, and in middle school, students are assigned to the same, 6 periods that they would have, but it's all online. And so, and then they move through the periods similar to as they would do during a typical school day. However, we are likely to make some adjustments to that after just the first few weeks.
Very good. And Polly, how about for Fremont Union?
Well, I'd just like to make the distinction that we are doing something different now than we were in the spring. We called the spring emergency remote learning, and we're now just calling what we're doing right now distance learning or remote learning. And our schedule is much like Mike's. It's very similar to what you would see in the high school typically. There are 2 90-minute periods for every section or class that a student takes. There's an additional time so that happens on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday. On Wednesday, there's a additional time for teachers to collaborate and work together. This is for every teacher we have. This is like being a brand new teacher. And then we have extra time for students to check in with their teachers. We have advisory and some other things. So basically, we're trying to keep the instructional minutes very similar, almost identical to what they would have if they were in in-person school now. It is synchronous learning, which means they are interacting with their teachers or their teacher is present at all times. And we think we're doing much more like real school, if I can call it that, now that we're in remote learning in this new semester.
Very good. And Polly, you hit on a question I was going to ask you and Lori, but I think you just about answered it, which is I was going to ask how the days of school and time in class different from, I don't know what to call it other than a traditional school year. And I think you told me, let me go ahead and let you.
Yeah, no, for us, it's very essentially identical. We decided that we would meet the state required instructional minutes with synchronous learning, and Jason's here. He knows well that we worked on that together, and our teachers understood that that was the best way to make great connections to school, between school and kids, between teachers and kids. And that's really what we're all trying to do our best at doing in this remote environment. But I think the idea of presenting the academic material is much easier. So it looks very similar in terms of the minutes, and we do meet the state requirements for that.
And Lori, how about for you?
Yeah, so obviously it's a little different with younger kids, right? The capacity to be able to stay online in front of a screen for prolonged periods of time may not be possible, let alone desirable. So with the age group, it's a little bit different. The state does require us to meet somewhere between 200 and 250 minutes, depending on the age group, because we cover all the way from TK all the way up through grade 8. And we meet those minutes through both synchronous and asynchronous time. So synchronous being kind of what you would think of as a combination of live meets and groups of kids together with a teacher, and then asynchronous, meaning that the kids are probably offline, doing some amount of work, supported and guided work, but still work, not necessarily in the presence of their teacher and the rest of the kiddos in the classroom. Our schedule is set up on a Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday groupings of that asynchronous and synchronous time. And then on Wednesdays, the kids all have one live meet a day to make sure that they're checking in with their teachers and their peers. And we're using that day for a lot of our social and emotional curriculum delivery and building community amongst our classes and things like that. But they meet one time live. Most of them are in the mornings right now. And then the rest of the day, they're working on asynchronous work that the teacher has put together for them. So that's what our days look like right now.
Thank you. And this next question I'm putting under the category of lessons learned. And I'm going to ask a few of you to respond to it. Juan, Kelly, then Peter, Jason, and Michelle. And the question is putting aside two areas. The first one being about technology and the lessons we learned about that. And the second one about how to get to know your kids. So put those two aside. What's different? What did we learn from the spring and what are we doing differently now in the fall? So Juan, let's start with you.
I think from the student perspective, something that we've kind of learned is getting accustomed to learning in different manners, I think. Because obviously through distance learning, we're not being taught necessarily in the same way that we are as if we are in person. And a lot of students have had to get accustomed to that. And at the same time, I also think it's taught us more about ourselves as student learners, what works for us and what doesn't work. I think that's something that a lot of us have observed. I especially have seen that I really do value being in person when it comes to learning. And you don't really think about that until, you can't go to school. But I think there's a lot of lessons that have come to students and teachers and parents alike also, where they see exactly how the whole learning process works, what works for the students, what doesn't work, and things like that.
Very good, thank you. And Kelly and then Peter, how about for you as parents? What have you learned here?
I think for me and my husband as parents of really young children, we have to really keep in mind that the spring was this emergency distance learning curriculum. And so we know that the teachers didn't have time to prepare. We know the district didn't have time to prepare. And so I guess there wasn't as much of the expectation of the rest, the learning for the rest of the school year. But we learned how to adapt. We have seen the kids adapt. And in the springtime, it was hard because it was like, okay, we still have the rest of March, April, and May. Let's try to salvage the rest of the school year. But we're also in survival mode, not just in the classroom, but also just COVID, like what's going on with COVID. But then now as the summer was leading into the fall, one thing we learned was how quickly and how able the district has been to establish this distance learning system. I can at least speak for myself on an elementary level. We have been so impressed with the synchronous meets, the daily get-togethers, and how the kids have been able to, they can navigate Google Classroom way better than I can. And my son is even like, no, mommy, you have to download as a PDF first before we can actually get, he's 6 years old. So major kudos to the district for being able to do that.
Excellent. And Peter, you've got older kids.
Yeah, so emergency is the right word. Came March when it happened, we thought, okay, let's just be careful, shelter, follow the rules. But before you realize it, it was an upheaval in every way, right? You have to rearrange the house, figure out if you have enough bandwidth. And just a side note, I thought the district did a tremendous job in terms of putting out devices and bandwidth to a lot of other families that we know that needed the connection. Because without that, I don't know if any of this could really go as smoothly as he did. And to be fair, I think I do talk to my kid. I had a senior who tried to finish her year as Cupertino High School, getting ready for college, not knowing how things were going to work out. Was there going to be graduation? How do you finish your final exams? What if the grades don't work out? Is she going to even have a college to go to? And then I have another who was a freshman last year. So we saw both extremes, someone who didn't have high school, and this was her first experience in high school, kind of being a very, very different first year in high school. But I would say from the emergency, just once again, I was going off track, is that it was unprepared on our part. And I thought the response from the school was the best they tried to do, but it was very inconsistent. What we saw was teachers took, very, very different ways of trying to adopt the technology, went from zero to some trying very, very hard. I think that's just an emergency. So what it is. But what I've seen now, and also having listened to what the school has tried to do, the district, teachers, and the principal, what we're seeing with the new school year is it's amazing. It does feel like school as usual. I think the schedule, the regimen of having classes for 90 minutes, at first they roll their eyes like, oh my goodness, these are going to be long Zoom sessions. But I think having the discipline of starting at a certain time every day, knowing you have these 4 classes one day, 2 classes the next day, repeat it Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Wednesday being a little bit different, it really helped. After 5 months of what I call fluidity, I think the system is working now. Sure, it's lacking the in-person, as Juan said. My kids are so both disappointed and starving for that. They're craving for that. They wish they could go back, but they understand the challenges ahead. So that being aside, I think that the system is working right now. I think they're getting the instruction. They're as busy as ever, but it feels like school, but without the other half, which is the social half.
Very good. Jason, how about for you? Oh, you're on mute.
I got it.
Thank you.
As we were last semester, we were in emergency learning, and teachers were really scrambling and really concerned about their students and concerned about engaging. And we spent a lot of time over the summer really honing in on the tools that we're going to use in this fall to really engage the students a lot more. So I think we're not in the emergency, but I think teachers now, as we come into this new school year, now that we're like 2 or 3 weeks in, are really starting to settle and understand all the different strategies they can use and be effective in this really new environment. And we're starting to settle. The students we got systems in place to make sure that we're engaging all the students and making sure they have the technology. We understand those systems, and there's been a ton of work on the district and everybody this summer to really try to make this work and be more effective this summer. And I think teachers are feeling positive about it, but of course, I think if you talk to all the teachers, I think they all want to be back in the rooms with their kids and seeing their kids. But we also understand the circumstances, and we know that's the best way to teach and connect with kids. But they're making the best of this situation right now.
Michelle, how about with you?
I think kind of reflecting on lessons learned, I think specific with technology, it was kind of mentioned a little bit earlier with that idea that not everyone has devices and Wi-Fi, or maybe not high quality Wi-Fi. So getting devices out, and I think there was a huge, in the spring, I think we passed out maybe 200 to 300 hotspots. And then this year we're close to almost 1,000 hotspots, right? So really making sure that everybody has what they need. And I think that kind of brings up a bigger piece, no worries, of the digital divide in general, right? Like this needs to be solutions, not just right now when we have to have it for virtual, but really students have to have it, and people have to have high quality bandwidth and devices to be successful in life, right? So I've been grateful that it's kind of brought that to the forefront in our, not just in the education world, but in our society in a bigger way.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, I was just saying with the getting to know kids, that's the end of year, right? The teachers were already established in their routines they knew the students.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that in a separate question. Thank you very much. I'm going to lean on Jason here for several questions about teachers. And it was just that question, Michelle, I was going to get to next, is how do teachers get to know kids in a virtual setting? How will teachers understand the specific learning styles, the needs of students in a virtual environment? And once they're known, how do you address those different learning styles?
It's a hard question. I think it's when you have students that, when we're talking about our sophomores, juniors, and seniors, we have established and understandings a lot of those students. So reaching out to other teachers that have worked with those students, understanding their tendencies. As a special education teacher myself, it's much easier to identify students that are on my caseload after I've gotten 2 or 3 years to know them and coming into this environment. The struggle I'm having right now is my incoming freshmen and getting to know them in this virtual environment. It's hard to do, but there's a lot of phone calls and emails to homes, connecting with families, seeing what's going on at home, identifying what strategies can work for those students. So it's more than just the classroom connection, it's connecting with the families on a more personal level and understanding exactly what the home is looking like when you have those opportunities to reach out to those families. And sometimes with the things in Zoom, sometimes you could just pull those kids into a breakout room and have a one-on-one conversation with some of them and work with them in that way. And I think one of the things we were talking about schedule earlier is our office hours. We built in office hours to our schedule, and the office hours really help to create a time where teachers can call a kid in and just talk to them one-on-one and see what's going on and see how they can support and help them get to know kids and their personal needs on those levels.
And this one is sort of a practical kind of question around what changes. I mean, there's some obvious ones, but what changes are teachers making to teach virtually? And what I'm thinking about is, for some classes, are they being recorded so kids can listen to them a second time? What kinds of things are happening in that vein?
Well, one of the big changes we did over the summer that we actually wrote into our contract is we created a common platform on which students connect with their teachers. So we have our Schoology program. And what we found out last year was we had teachers scrambling to go online. So some of them were using Google Classroom, some were using their own personal websites. Some were using our School Loop format. There was really no one place where students can go and get all their work and see all their progress in all their classes and see their grades, and the parents also. So we found that a lot of students were jumping all over the place, and that created an extra stress for students. So one of the things we did was we spent a lot of time learning how to use this new Schoology program and incorporate it and figure out how this was going to work. And I think having that common platform has really helped us from last year to this year in that sense, and engaging students and making sure students understand exactly what they need to do when they're in school.
Very good. This next question is to Polly and then to Lori, and that is, what support and guidance are the teachers asking for and receiving from the district?
Okay, well, I think Jason alluded to a little of this right now. We are doing ongoing training around Schoology to be sure teachers have all the tools they need to work with our common platform. Where they are asking for time to work together. Right now, I think there's less curriculum development than there might have been a year ago. And right now they're working together to say, how are we going to do this? Or how are you doing this? And I think it's much more like having everyone feel like they're brand new teachers, frankly. I think you have to realize this is tremendously stressful for people. So we're trying to be both supportive about the specific strategies, information, techniques, technology that they might need. And I think then we have to give them plenty of time to talk to each other, because often they can learn most from each other in that process. So they are asking for that. And then they're not asking for it yet, but I would anticipate that over time, we're going to want to give them as much emotional support as we can. This is stressful. This is stressful for everyone personally. And then let's add to that the stress of feeling like you're a brand new teacher doing something new every day and trying to connect to 150 kids. So I don't know, Jason, if you would agree with me, but from my perspective, one of the things we want to really start thinking about is how we can do our best to support our teachers emotionally and to be flexible enough to help them manage the things that they're trying to juggle at home.
Very good.
I'll try not to double down on anything Polly just said, because so much of it is similar, and I could easily just plus one and echo it all. But I think professional development is obviously a key area for us. We had a lot of teachers asking for different levels of support. So building in sort of a self-assessment tool for our teachers to be able to figure out what professional development was of most use to them, because everybody's at different levels. We have some teachers who, had a really good digital game, even to begin with, and then others who were really needing to start with some foundational building blocks to build on. And another big one, I think, just in that same sort of area is we had teachers that had needs for device support and connectivity support. So making sure that the needs of all of our students were met in terms of closing the digital divide, but also for all of our staff. And that's true for both our teachers and our support staff, our instructional aides and behavioral interventionists who are working with students as well. In our special education. And then I would absolutely echo everything Polly's saying about the wellness aspect for our staff. This absolutely is new and stressful, and this is long hours, and this is, asking our teachers to wear the growth mindset hat that they demonstrate so well for our students day in, day out. It's hard to learn and grow every day sometimes. There's a reason that growth spurts are hard. So, I'll close with that. How's that?
Thank you. Perfect. Jason, back to you. What are teachers looking for from parents at this point?
Well, what I've seen a lot of teachers do is reach out to families and try to connect with the families to see what is going on at home, how we can best support the students at home, and how to get the students to engage in the classrooms. It's hard. It's one of the big struggles of being in Zoom meetings is that students' engagement can wave, and it's hard to monitor that as a teacher. So having an environment at home, having understanding where the student's at, what kind of supports they have at home, can really support the teacher in helping that student get what they need in the classroom.
Very good. Peter and then Kelly, what are you looking for from teachers? Is there something more that you would like?
You must have read the expression on my face. I was itching to answer. I think in times like this, there are so many unknowns. We're all in uncharted waters. And I know it's stressful, both for parents trying to figure out, just add an extra slice of providing the support, whether it's the technology or just making sure that they're on top of things. I think the one thing that we do have to add, it may seem like more work, but hopefully it will have long-term dividend, which is, I think we need to communicate more, both from the teachers asking, what is it that, just as Jason said, what is the situations of more? What can they do, or what can parents do? I think this is going to take a community effort where we're both pitching in from both sides. Not that everybody can all give equally, because some families maybe have, a lack of bandwidth. But I think we have to just be a lot more open about what is our plan, even if we don't have a full plan. But this is what we have now. And if there's new information coming in October, in December, we will change. We will pivot. I think this is a situation where we have to over communicate from both sides. The parents have to tell more, ask more. Teachers have to also tell more, ask more. And it goes back and forth, because we're going to have to make a lot of adjustments together. And that's how we can sort of, move through a changing situation. So I think we have to over communicate. I think that's not so much more work. In long term will actually hopefully relieve the stress and provide more connection, which I think right now, my feeling is right now we're starting out the school year, everybody's really busy, and we're actually communicating less than what we used to do, even in normal school years.
Okay. Kelly, how about with you?
I think that I will second a lot of what Peter said about the communication. that it is very important, especially for the younger children, to know if the kids are, it's like trying to be a parent without over parenting, right? Like without being a helicopter. Like I can't, well, I work full time, so I'm in the hospitals, my husband's in meetings all day. So we're not always aware of what is going on with our kids' work and what they're submitting, what they're turning in, what they're getting back. And so it's important for the teachers to let us know. But from our standpoint, it seems like our teachers have been doing a great job. And it's really hard because, like we already talked about, at this point, they're still trying to learn the habits and the personalities of every child, which they were already able to have done like in the spring. But the other thing that we as parents really want to see is a lot of effort. At home, we are putting in the effort to try to make sure that they're on top of things, getting into the meetings, trying to get everything done. And so it's really great to see that the teachers have put in so much effort, not only individually, but as teams, so that their curriculum are solidified for the whole grade, and they're all teaching basically the same thing. And so we've been very impressed with that so far.
Very good. Juan, to you, what about for students? Is there more you want or feel you need?
I think we have a good amount of things as students. One thing that happened a lot is we were concerned about returning to school because emergency distance learning was a little bit rough, I think, on everybody's end. And I think it's completely understandable. I mean, a lot of the teachers had to adapt all of a sudden to using a computer every single day for a ton of tasks, and students alike, everybody had to just adjust to this like new normal, I guess. However, with the current plans that we have for distance learning, it feels a lot better because there's a lot more structure, which a lot of students were missing. A lot of students needed that. And then at the same time, I do think that communication aspect has opened up a lot more. On my personal end, I have had a lot of teachers that really want to connect with their students. One, because it's difficult to connect with the student online. You can't really speak to them personally. So they've done all they can to try to connect with their students, but then also because it allows them to understand what's going on in their personal lives. And that's something that teachers had to learn. And I was very grateful that teachers were aware of these things when emergency distance learning occurred, because a lot of students and some parents were calling for synchronous learning. But the problem was that a lot of students were not able to function with synchronous learning because they had to go out and work to help supplement because their parents lost their job and were unable to get a source of income, or they had to take care of their little brother or sister while their parents went out to work. There was a lot of factors that made life very unstable for everybody. And so I do think that communication was key then and now. And I'm very grateful for my teachers, at least, that have been able to communicate with their students.
Very good. Okay, Jason, two more for you. Are teachers feeling community pressure to return to the classrooms?
I think teachers want to return to the classrooms, honestly. I mean, there's definitely a push to have us return to the classrooms, and I think that's the ideal situation. We all want to get back into the classrooms and connect with our kids and get back to those teaching strategies and engagement strategies that we're all very familiar with. So the question is the situation safe? Is this current situation of getting back into the classroom with the PPE more beneficial to do that, or is it better and more engaging to be online? I think a lot of teachers really want to get back in the classroom, and I bet if I took a survey, and I even take surveys of my students, of how they said, I do want to be back. I want to be back in the classroom connecting with kids. I just want it to be safe, and that's the major concern. We want it to be safe for everybody.
So you've sort of responded to this question, but just to sort of summarize it in one question. What's the pulse of teachers? How are they feeling?
I think they're just getting they're just starting to get feeling comfortable. I get a lot of feedback right now that they're starting to feel like teachers again. They're starting to, like the last 3 weeks we've been running around trying to figure all this out, over the last months I should say, and they're just starting to feel like they're engaging and figuring this current circumstance out in Zoom in this remote learning. But I think teachers really do want to get back in the rooms and see their kids. I mean, I miss my students personally, and when I'm on a Zoom meeting and they don't have their screens on, I can't see their faces, I miss that. I miss seeing my students. I miss having the smiles and connecting with them. And I think that is where the real relationships and for the learning environment really happen.
Very good, thank you. I'm going to shift gears here and go into the area of governance. And the first question, Michelle, is for you. Who decides you can open, and who decides if you must close again?
Thanks. I think the reopening decision would be made by the superintendent and the board, following guidance and direction from the county and in conjunction with our community. And I think for closing, there already is from state and county, once schools do open, there are protocols to follow, and when a classroom might close, or when a school might close, or when a district might close, there are guidelines there from the county and the state related to that piece of it.
Okay, and so I was really getting at that state governance issue. You have to be able to comply with the state standards in order to open. That's the first threshold. Is that correct?
State and county, right? So
Yes,
yeah.
okay.
So when it is allowed to open, it's not just open the doors and everyone's there, right? There are lots of protocols and procedures, and kind of referring to what Jason said, right? Making sure that it is safe, right? And I think there is a balance of there are clearly risks for coming back during COVID-19, but there are also a lot of health risks for a lot of our community if we don't come back, right? So there are health risks both ways that we need to weigh as we're making the decisions.
So I'm going to get to the second half of this question, which is the first one is, can you open, which doesn't mean that you will open. And so this is to Michael and then to Polly. Assuming you meet the criteria to open the criteria established by the state and by the county, who will decide that you will open, or how will you decide that you will open? And Michael, I'll start with you.
Okay, that's sort of similar to how Michelle answered the question. So for example, there's been a little bit of confusion the last couple of days since yesterday, where there was a county meeting where they said that Santa Clara County has moved into the red, which is meant to be a reassuring color, but to me, red sounds like a not completely secure color. Yellow sounds closer to secure than red does. And I say that because I'm not confident that our community at this time feels comfortable coming back with all that implies, with all the PPE and the students sitting 6 feet apart and teachers behind a desk 6 feet apart. Comparing that with all of that and the risk with the distance learning, which I think when the state kind of set up some of these guidelines, they were thinking in terms of the learning that was happening back in the spring, which all the panelists have said is far different in these 3 districts. And I know, especially in Sunnyvale, we're extraordinarily proud of the work our teachers are doing and our students and our parents on the learning now. So it's a much different calculus than it might have been in the spring. The learning is much more robust, never going to be as good for most students, for the vast majority of students, as it is with in-person teaching. So we're going to take all of that into consideration when the county and the state says the schools in Santa Clara County can open. They haven't said that yet. There's a possibility they might say that in 2 weeks. So after 14 days of being in the red zone, then the schools are qualified in a county to reopen, as long as the county health officer says that it's okay. So that's kind of a long answer to your question,
You know, and I'm gonna reel you in a little tighter on this answer
Okay.
too, because I think we know. So we have the standards, and my question is really getting at, is there a distance between the standards for the state and the county and the actual decision to open? Is there a gap? In other words, if the county says red is good, are you likely to be a district that says red is not good enough? We got to be yellow.
Yes, there's likely to be a distance because we're talking about two different measurements. The county and the state are talking about a measurement involved with percent of people in the community who are testing positive, and the number of tests that are being given and all that. And we're making a judgment about how safe and secure our teachers and staff and students feel, and weighing that against the value of the education. So yeah, there's a significant distance because we're talking about two different things. We're talking about some health metrics, and we're talking about education and whole different kind of realm of safety that involves, of course, the virus and the likelihood of contracting it. I guess I would say our decision is much more complex than the simple red light or yellow light or purple light that the county might give.
Yeah, so let me ask Polly the same question, and I'm really looking at what I know is a very difficult kind of thing to articulate, which is, how do you know when you'll be there? How do you know when you'll be ready to open? Will you be establishing metrics? If you meet them, then you'll decide you will return to an open class, to a traditional classroom. So I know this is a very hard question, but it's certainly out there in the community in terms of wanting.
Yeah, and it's in my head too. Just call me anytime. 2 a.m. is fine. I think Mike would agree. This is essentially the most complex question that we all are anticipating having to figure out, right? And we aren't doctors. And so we need to rely on the medical information and the information that we're getting from the state and the county, and we appreciate that very much. And Mike's also right that because our decision doesn't just include that, we have to think about the education. So, for example, I would say it even differs in the grade levels. So I would say there's a different answer. I would say that if we heard 3 weeks from now, we could return, you might ask the pedagogical question or the educational question about when is it best for students to return to ensure that they get the content and the grades and the continuous education that they need. And when are the families going to be ready to send the students back? When are they going to feel reassured enough? And if there's a group of, when we first did a survey on this, we found out that there were parents who said, not until there's a vaccine that's been tested. And that was not an insignificant group, but I would not hang my hat on that survey that we took last spring. We'd have to really look at that, because it could be we essentially start dividing our schools into two groups of kids, and maybe even two groups of teachers that are more vulnerable, and kids and families that really feel strongly they're not ready to send their kids back to in-person school. So I think there's our decision, and then there's our decision, because we are public schools, about how we're going to meet the needs of all those different people and their positions and how they feel about the education of their children. So I think that, and then we also have we have 1,000 employees. And we need to be sure that as they connect with, in a high school situation, 150 to 160 students, what does that mean for their safety? I mean, often you'll see the kind of information from the county is saying, well, you can have a small pod of kids, 12 to 14. That doesn't fit for a class size for high school or elementary. So that's where the complexities also start to come in. So I would say we keep monitoring the information. We work with the community, the teachers, and our staff, and our students in our case, because you can hear from one, we have students that really are valuable people in the discussion, and think about how we're going to navigate that and be sure for our kids, are they getting prepared appropriately for college? Are they getting the grades they need? Are they, you know, so there's a lot of those factors too.
Would it be safe to say, and I'm just intuiting this from some of the comments both of you have made, that because of the improved virtual environment, the decision to open the schools, there may be slightly less pressure to open them up because the experience has improved? Would that push it out?
Well,
just a little
I'm
bit?
going to answer that in two ways. The first answer is, yeah, probably. I hadn't thought of it, but you're probably right. The second one is that when we went to remote learning, and we, prior to this, were at one point considering a hybrid model where some kids would come in some days and other kids would come in, we really did come to the conclusion that pedagogy and teaching is not effective in a hybrid model.
Right.
And we cannot cover the material, we cannot do the schooling, frankly, as effectively as we can do in good remote learning. So that gradual bringing back teachers and students that a hybrid model would allow, and maybe allow to happen a little sooner, is something we really, after a lot of thought and work, decided was not effective. And we want to do what's most effective and most successful with our kids. So I'd say yes, because we're doing it better. And also because we really did come to the conclusion that remote was better than hybrid.
Good. Lori, a question for you. What health and safety procedures will be put in place if and when students return to the campus? And are there any physical changes to the schools that need to be made and haven't yet been made? And I'm thinking of like HVAC improvements.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously that's a question that's very much framed in the guidance that we have from both the county and the state. There are definitely protocols that we need to follow for much of that. I think, like all districts, our staff and executive team have dug in on every aspect of that, from HVAC to touchless faucets to, you know, the PPE, and that PPE may be different depending on what your role is in the district, right? And how closely you need to physically interact with students. There are certainly considerations as far as testing goes. I know a lot of people aren't comfortable with the pretty liberal amount of testing that the county and state are requiring. You know, it's once every 2 months for our teachers. And I think there's a lot of question about, would that really be enough to really be effective and really change any sort of outcomes? You know, there's certainly the considerations around if at some point a screening version of a test becomes more readily available for us to use, the antigen-based testing as opposed to the PCR testing, both because there's a more rapid response, but also because it allows you to use it as a true screening tool for safety. I'm trying to remember the other parts of your question, Tracy. I don't know if I hit on the multi-part there, but
You got a lot of it. Very good, thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Polly, just one quick question for you, and that is, putting aside any of the, I'm sorry, every time I reach, it's because questions are coming in. Putting aside special needs students for just a second, are you aware of any schools in our county that are open for in-classroom for traditional learning? I'm thinking private as well as public schools.
I think there are a handful of private schools in the county that are doing some in-person schooling. I'm not aware of any public schools. Mike might have a little more. I don't know, certainly don't know any high schools. I think that because we've been told that high schoolers are more likely to be like adults in terms of getting ill and transmitting it. Don't know the medical information for sure. I don't know any high schools, but I have heard that there's a handful of elementaries that have asked for the exemption and are back in school.
yeah,
Is that what
I
you know?
want to say on the County School Boards Association call this afternoon, I think there's maybe 3 that have been granted their waivers at this point, but I don't know that any of them, and the waivers are for, I think mostly special populations that they are looking at bringing back.
I think there are, but aren't there some private ones that are some challenge, maybe a challenger school or
Yeah.
2, or?
Yeah.
There are some privates
And
that
for
have.
those who don't know what a waiver is, Lori, maybe just very briefly define what a waiver is.
Oh, well, while we're still, now they're calling it purple. Before it was the, you know, we were on the county watch list, but now with the new system, well, our county has been purple in order for districts to be able to consider bringing back any students. recently you needed to go through a waiver process applying for which specific groups and all of the plans and protocols you had in place to be able to safely try and bring back those groups. There were requirements about needing to have the agreement of your unions in order to do that, and really to have a reason as to why you felt that you really could only serve the needs of those students by bringing them back in person. And if you met all those requirements with the county health officer could grant you a waiver. And I believe those waivers were only available for K through 6, not for up at the high school level, and not even for our older middle school students.
And I think we have one question on this, so I'm going to ask it at this point. But I think I know the answer based on what you've already shared, which is, would any of you consider applying for a waiver more broadly for K to 6, not just for special needs? I'm thinking I've already heard the answer is no, but let me just test that.
Well, let me finish one thing. Once we turn to red, we would, and are there for 14 days, if the county is there for 14 days, the waiver process goes away. So we're sort of in this shades of gray area right now where we may it may or may not make sense for districts to go through the work involved in trying to waiver any longer. But anyway, I'll let Michael might have some insight on that.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, Lori. There's also another, I guess, guidance you would call it, that allows for small group support, not instruction. So the state distinguishes between instruction, which would be what you would get through a waiver, bringing students on campus through a waiver, and this other small group support process, which doesn't require applying, where the intent of that is that you could provide support services to students. So one thing that Sunnyvale School District is considering, for example, is for students starting, say, at our Title I schools that are not able to engage in the online instruction, we're considering potentially bringing them together and having them still have the same teacher, still be online, but have it on campus. So there's support, there's a safe place for them to log on, there's reliable Wi-Fi, there's a desk, there's a paraeducator perhaps, or two supporting them in the classroom. They would have access to social services, our social workers, our meal services. So we are considering that, that option for some students at this point. Also considering the possibility of having our social workers, when parents request to meet them in person, we're able to do that. So small groups or individual supports for students is something that you can do, and that's without a waiver. You can do that currently. So we're starting to put that together.
Assessments too, right, Michael?
Assessments, yes. Yeah.
Okay. And we're going to get to assessments in just a second. I'm going to shift the conversation to the category of creating equity or dealing with inequity. And Michelle brought this up earlier about bridging the digital divide by providing laptops and hotspots for families. I'm going to start with Juan and ask, with regard to technology needs of students, have they been met for you and your friends? Have the schools bridged that divide, at least for high school students?
I do think that from my own perspective, that the schools have done a lot to be able to help all of these peoples and families that need these different technologies. In the COVID task force meetings that I was in, I saw that the district tried to give out as many, I believe there were hotspots that they were giving out to different families. And I think that was something that was very helpful, especially at my school, FHS, a lot of low-income students go there. And so there was a lot of difficulty there trying to figure out if those families had enough computers, because a lot of them had multiple children sharing one computer, which doesn't work anymore. It's very difficult to be able to do that. And second of all, if they had a strong enough internet access, because a lot of the times they had internet that wasn't strong enough to be able to hold maybe 2, sometimes even 3 Zoom meetings at once. And so I do think that from what I was able to see with my friends and with the people that I knew and communicated with, I do think that the district and our schools did the best that they could and did a good job in being able to help provide all of these needs to the students.
Very good. Michael, a question for you about providing meals for kids. Some schools in the good old days were providing 3 meals a day for their students. What's the situation now, and how are you doing meal delivery?
So that's something we're struggling with at the very beginning of the year. So in the spring, the federal government allowed us to begin what's called a seamless summer program. So we could, actually it was community feeding. So we could, anyone who came up, we could provide them with meals. We didn't ask their names. They weren't necessarily students. And we were giving away thousands of meals per week, which was wonderful. On top of that, we also work really closely with Sunnyvale Community Services and now the Second Harvest Food Bank, where we provide food at our Title I schools and Columbia Middle School, 2 weeks worth of food for a family of 4. So it's delivered twice a week. So that's another program that we have. And I think at each site, we deliver at least to 150 families. So that's a big program that we're doing. At the start of this school year, the lunch program, we were told you have to go back to your regular lunch program. So you can imagine how that is. Students are online in a very typical school day at home, and then having to get to school to pick up their lunches. And so like right out of the gate, the numbers were down, and it also wasn't free anymore. So that changed just in the last week, where the federal government moved back to the seamless summer program. So now we're able to ramp up our program. We also offer through an ACES grant, which is an after-school grant. We call it KLAS, Kids Learning After School. We offer that program, which allows us to offer dinner as well. So currently starting, I guess today, we have been providing breakfast, lunch, and dinner to our students at 5 of our schools. It might be 4, and then 2 of them don't have the dinner, but something like that. So that's what we're doing, and we're doing it every day. We're trying that. We realized that I think Cupertino and Fremont bundle their food and they give it to the kids 1 time a week. And so there's pros and cons of that. Our goal right now is to make sure that especially our neediest kids get fed. And so we're trying everything we can to make that happen. That's a major focus currently.
Very good, thank you.
Sure.
Michelle, a question for you. A lot in the press in the last couple months about pods. What are they? And are they a real thing? Meaning, are they being used by parents?
I'll say a little bit, and then if maybe someone has more. I know friends in other districts have been doing it a lot more. I haven't. I'm sure it's happening in our district, but I haven't heard a lot about it. I do notice anecdotally from a teacher in a neighboring district, she said the students who are in pods, it's actually way trickier because then you're hearing the other students and they're having a hard time. So I know it can be helpful for parents, right, who are as parents who are trying to work and do students to kind of take turns with that. So I think it's a mix, right? There are benefits from it and difficulties from it.
And what is a pod? Just define it for our audience.
So my understanding of what a pod is, say a group of, 3 to 5 families get together and say, hey, each day, like I'm going to take the kids and maybe we'll all be outside. So I can kind of be the one who's helping and supporting them that day. That's my understanding at least, but I don't know. There are probably many ways to do pods.
Kelly, I know you and I have talked about pods. What's your experience? What's your conclusion about them?
I think that, so I have several friends who are in pods, and most of these are in elementary aged kids, but we also have some friends who are in the high school aged kids that have gotten together, and that has been to share Wi-Fi. If their access at home hasn't been great, then they'll go to the home where there is adequate access with maybe 3 to 5 kids, so they can have Wi-Fi access. This is for the high school kids. As far as the younger kids, it's usually 2 or 3 families and between 3 to 5 children that get together either at one person's home the entire time, or they rotate between homes. And either the parents are rotating, being the facilitator for distance learning, or people have been hiring tutors. Either tutors to just teach all new curriculum on their own, or to basically tutors to facilitate the distance learning part. It can work if the kids are on task, but like you had already mentioned, that sometimes it can be very disruptive if you have multiple students in different grades trying to log in and then just hearing things, especially if earphones aren't involved. But some kids learn better in those kind of environments anyways, where they feel like there's that added group environment to keep them, well, if you can do it, I can do it kind of thing, versus you're just sitting at home. Like my son, sometimes I see him doing this while he's by himself doing the distance learning part on his own. I think every family has to decide if it works for them. Some people need the childcare. Some people realize that their kids aren't going to learn well with the parents' guidance, and they need somebody else outside to actually force them to do the work. But also, whenever you do have pods, you are going to introduce all those families into your bubble. Some people are trying to do it outdoors, but recently with the weather that it's been like this, it's really hard because it's so smoky. But most of the pods have been indoors, where you just trust those families to keep those bubbles small, because, you know, once they're in your pod, then everybody in their bubble becomes part of your bubble as well.
Thank you. I have so many questions. I'm going to just race ahead to a few of these. Assessment, a lot of questions here, and I'm going to ask Polly and then Michael to address this one. Are there new state requirements for how to evaluate students? Will you be giving pass-fail or letter grades?
There aren't any new assessments, and I think we're all hoping that any state assessments will be put on hold. It's just kind of one more thing we don't need, but I don't know. But in terms of pass-fail, no, that we did credit, no credit in the spring. We felt like that was the only fair thing to do given the way the learning was able to be given. But we have planned always since then, a few weeks in, that when fall came, we would be giving grades, and that's what's happening. I don't think it's easy for teachers, and the assessments are needing to be thoughtfully developed. So it's not just a matter of true false tests or multiple choice. It really is something that helps kids express themselves and answer questions in ways that wouldn't be just simple answers, because that's what we're going to be doing to check learning.
Michael?
So yeah, I agree with Polly. We don't know of any new tests from the state, and I mean, at this point, they're planning on doing the spring testing, but when we get there, hopefully not. I think we all survived without the spring test this last year, and maybe that's one thing we've learned, is that it's maybe not quite as necessary. But in terms of assessment for our school district, we use standards-based grading. So we actually began some work last year before all the pandemic started in reviewing our standards-based grading system. And we just adopted a revised version of it. That's a 1 through 4 scale that we're employing this year. And it's really standards-based grading is designed to measure students' progress on a particular standard. So it's not a traditional grade, which sometimes can be, it's not, grades aren't supposed to be this way, but sometimes they can measure if a student's attendance, or if they turned the work in, or if they sat still in class. This isn't supposed to be any of that. It's supposed to be a student's progress on a standard. And so we're proceeding with that this year.
Very good. Jason, so how do you do assessment in the virtual environment? And the kinds of things I'm wondering about is, do you have to assume all assessment is open book? So how do you tackle this? And a big piece of this for me is, how do you, especially at high school level, reinforce the need for academic integrity?
Well, I think it largely varies depending on what subjects you're teaching. There are certain subjects that, say, for example, math, where You need to identify how the students are working at the problem and coming to the correct answer, as opposed to art or English, where you can collect an essay to grasp whether they have understanding of the reading. But the teachers are doing some open notes, and there's a lot of different things going on right now. Teachers are still trying to figure it out and coming up with new programs that are in there, testing them out right now. And academic integrity is a big concern for a lot of the teachers. And I think another thing with assessments too is you can maintain some sort of academic integrity for the most part by timing the test, but then you also run into situations where you have learning students that need a little extra time on the test. So we're also kind of weigh all this in together as we work through this. But there's a lot of different strategies, and teachers getting really creative and how they're assessing and evaluating the work of the students. And there's a lot more, I think, looking at the processes of learning as opposed to the product. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Lori, I believe I understand it that in the spring that the state level standardized tests were canceled. Are they canceled for this for the current academic year? Nobody knows.
Polly doing this.
Did I just get the answer?
Right.
Shoulders
I
shrugged?
mean, yeah, I mean, I think the conversation going on right now is largely about the why. You know, why would we do that? What do we stand to gain from that? And is it good for kids? And does it help us further the goal to ensure as few learning gaps as possible and as robust an education, you know, to deliver for kids as possible? And so I think right now, most educators would probably tell you, like Polly said, that they hope that there isn't spring testing this year, but we don't have a definitive answer yet there. You know, and I think, I don't know, I would assume most districts are going through the process we are, which is reevaluating, you know, why we're assessing and what value do we stand to gain from it. And it's almost, I know you have a kind of a silver linings question, I think, that was in the possible queue. But for us, I think that process of going through having robust discussions around why we would assess and what we stand to gain from it has actually been a good thing.
Let me share a question that we got, which I think starts to point out why, at least why some of the parents might want it. The question makes an assumption, which is that given the inevitability of learning loss through the pandemic, and so I'm not going to finish the question, but that's the background on that would say that if the public believes or parents believe there is a learning loss, is this a metric by which you can validate that there was or was not?
Right. And so, I mean, like part of the process we're going through is rather than sort of the typical end of term kind of assessments, we're looking at smaller adaptive assessments that gather data and gather information about learning gaps so that we can address them right away, right? We don't want kids to get through multiple chapters worth of math where they were missing a key foundational piece back in the beginning. We want to know when they're there that, oh, we need to circle back on that concept and do it, right? So I think we've conditioned ourselves to think that big assessments at the end of periods of learning is the only way assessment happens that's meaningful. And I actually think personally that's kind of garbage. We need to really think about why we would collect that data and then what do we do with it that's actually meaningful for kids. I don't know. I'm sure the superintendent have a lot of thoughts.
I'm going to ask for some quick responses because I do want to get to my last and favorite question. But Jason, one of the questions that we got had to do with basically when you're testing, when you're doing assessment of kids, how do you know they're not having technology problems, or how do you accommodate for technology problems while the testing is taking place? Are they able to tell you, I got an internet problem, I can't respond quickly enough? Or it's sort of a practical question from somebody.
I think we have to address each individual case individually and really evaluate whether or not that they are having technology, and then address the technological issues. And we're doing a lot of learning right now and figuring out exactly what is going on. And I don't know if there's a right answer other than the fact that we just have to look at each individual case and really use our best judgment to see whether or not the kids are and they are holding that academic integrity high. So it's a lot of judgment calls on teachers, I feel, too.
Jason, I'm going to ask you another question, and you've touched on it before in some of your responses, but what are the strategies to help re-engage students who are not participating?
Well, there's a lot of, well, we have a wonderful system in our district where we have a lot of collaborative groups, and in those collaborative groups we have a lot of teachers that understand where different students are. So we're engaging teachers looking for different strategies in those groups. We've even had a group that embraces Zooms and comes up with a lot of different icebreakers and stuff that we can use Zoom to make it more fun. And then when we're really struggling to connect with students, we have a support system with our administrators at the sites to actually reach out and see if we can try to connect with those families and find out what the real issue might be. Is it technology? Is the students struggling emotionally? Are they struggling with being on Zoom all day? What are the issues? And so we can address those issues on each individual basis.
Michael, a quick question for you, and it's a thread through a number of the questions we're receiving, which is the belief that there are long-term learning implications from this period of virtual learning. And the question is around, is that true? If so, how do you anticipate sort of a makeup burst once traditional classrooms return?
That's a pretty complex question. So I'd start by saying that, if you say that learning comes through adversity or challenge, this is a challenging time full of adversity. And these students, these young people who are going through this time have the opportunity, if we as the grown-ups lead them properly, to really learn quite a bit about themselves and about community, about each other. A lot of that isn't measured on tests. But I think that's a real opportunity that shouldn't be lost. So I'd start with that. The second thing I would say is we know what we're in right now. And so it is an opportunity to review everything that we're doing. And we've talked for years about how perhaps the best learning is more about depth and less about breadth. So less about covering every page in the book and more about going deep. And so maybe this is an environment where, since we're throwing everything out, we're able to restart and we're able to learn more deeply. Now that might imply that the assessments that we've used, whether they're standardized or our own developed ones in a school district or a teacher's own developed assessments, might be different, because you're realizing, oh, I'm able to do something different here because I'm starting over, and I want to measure that. So that's maybe a little bit of a revolutionary type of answer, but I think teachers are actually thinking that way now. Given this environment, what's the best we can do of this? And then I would also say that in this environment, and I said it a little bit earlier, this is not the best environment, I'm confident, for most students, but for some students, this might be quite a good environment, and those students might be doing quite well and excelling. And so that's another opportunity too. So this whole idea of a presupposition that students are suffering learning loss through this time, that's not necessarily true, or doesn't have to be true, depending on how individual teachers or schools address the situation.
Very good. Lori, a question for you, and this is around socialization, and then Juan, I'd like you to pitch in on this one as well. We sort of touched on it earlier, the transition of kids new to schools or freshmen going into high school, where they don't have a cohort of friends that is based in the school. What can schools do to help with that socialization, and what can the district or community resources or activities, what in that arena can be provided to help with that, the introduction and socialization of those kids in those transitional years?
So I'm guessing you picked on me because I have a transitional kiddo
You
myself
do.
this year, right? Yeah, so mine is new to middle school this year. Lucky us, this was our year to make that jump. So I'll answer as both a mom and a board member. I think that we tried very hard, and I'm absolutely sure my fellow districts did as well, to really figure out a way to carry out our traditional activities that we build around orienting, but more so welcoming our kids to the new site for the beginning of the year. So for us, we run a web program for our incoming middle school students. So Where Everyone Belongs is web. So we still ran that program for both our elementary and our middle school sites. We started out the beginning of the school year for actually every grade with a week and a half of just dedicated time for community building and establishing relationships and classroom norms and helping kids make that transition before we really started to dive into some of the academic standards work, if you will. So I think it's being deliberative and conscious about setting up your programs to try and help kids build those relationships. And that time is so valuable for the learning that will take place, because when kids feel safe and when they feel like they're in a place where they have a connection to the people they're there with, they're going to show up for the learning and they're going to learn. I think we were very conscious about setting up our program for success for that. And then at our middle schools, clubs is another big way. That's part of our Wednesday social emotional. And then at all of our sites, the social emotional meets and sort of focus on exercises and activities on those Wednesdays for all of our kiddos.
Well, and how about for high school freshmen?
Yeah, I do think that it's important to be able to talk about this, because I have been thinking how interesting it must be for freshmen that are coming in, not getting that experience of being able to go to their new school in person. Because I think there's two transitions that have to be made with this. One is a whole learning transition, because obviously middle school and high school aren't the same. Yes, they both have periods and things like that, but both the high school is much more intense, I think, and there's a new way that the students have to learn. Basically, they have to adapt to a new learning style. And on the other hand, I also think that there's a cultural change from middle to high school, where in high school you start joining a lot more clubs, you start creating a larger network, typically with new students, speaking to new people, forming more connections with your teachers, I think. And so again, I do think it is difficult for students to be able to make this shift. And it's a little unfortunate that they have to make it through this whole online thing. And I think it's good that we're acknowledging that it is difficult and they might struggle. But I think that what the schools are doing, like Lori said, I think are great things that can allow students to feel a little more comfortable as they come into these new schools. And on the other hand, I also think that students have to be very open to trying new things. I think I have a little cousin who's going into high school. This is her first year. And not only is she going into a new school, she also changed districts. So that means that it's two changes for her. And one of the things that happens is that she has nobody there that she knows. And so it's a little bit difficult to make friends. And obviously it's hard to make friends online, since you're really only just seeing their faces a few hours a day and you can't really communicate with them well. But I do think that students should be open to trying to connect with their peers and their teachers, even in this strange format, because it's more important now than ever for us to find these connections with others. And also, I think, like Lori said, clubs are a thing that are really good to be able to get students together. And it is a little bit difficult for clubs to meet online. But I do think that it's important for students to try to be open and try to search out new clubs, new things that they can do, speak with new people in order to feel this sense of community and connection, and make the transition a little bit less difficult because they have the support from peers and teachers.
So I have so many more questions, but I'm running out of time. So yes, I do have my favorite child question, and I'll do that as the last one. And I'm just going to go in the order that I see people. I'll just ask you by name. Silver linings. What are the silver linings out of all of this? And if you all just give me one good one. And, Lori, I'll pick on you first because I know you've got one ready to go. So what's your silver lining?
I think it's discovering that good quality remote learning or distance learning actually works well for some learners, and that we are learning lessons right now that I think actually we should probably, and I think we will wind up looking at continuing as to whether or not we continue a strand, an alternative program, I don't know what, because there are some kiddos that this is a great environment for. So I'll call that out as a silver lining, meeting the needs of a group that maybe we hadn't been meeting as well before.
And then and I'll just anticipate for everybody. Michelle, if you'd go next and then Kelly afterwards.
One of the silver linings I was thinking about is kind of the idea of parent engagement, right? That it's something that schools, always are working on. And it's kind of been a little bit forced now that it's not possible to do school without more parent engagement. And just like one side note that at our board meeting last week, one of our cabinet members shared was with IEP meetings, often it's difficult because you're trying to get them to come on campus and they have jobs, they have other children. And so in this environment where you can't do that, you have to do virtual, they've been able to connect with families more. And she said that's something they'll keep doing, right? Even past when things go back to a new normal, that there are a lot of new ways to engage with families.
Very good. Kelly and then Michael.
Silver lining that my kids are best friends and learning from each other. They're so close now that they don't know what it's like to have other friends, sadly or not sadly, and also just being able for the parents to engage so much more, and they're looking over their work and sometimes like hearing what's going on in the classrooms has been nice too.
Very good. Michael and then Juan. You're on mute, Michael.
So last fall, I think it was like October or November, we developed as a school district a new technology plan, and it was a 3-year plan, and it had to do with by the 3rd year, getting devices in the hands of kids and standardizing the applications that we would have teachers use, and all kinds of things about our student information system and assessment and how teachers could collaborate. We blew through that 3-year plan in about 3 weeks, and we're ready for a new 3-year plan. So we have, I guess the silver lining is we've learned so much about ourselves and so much about technology and best practices. And we also learned, my goodness, we can do things fast if we need to. So that's really amazing.
Good. Juan and then Jason.
I think for me, one of the silver linings that I've noticed as a high school student and with other high school students is that even though we're apart from each other, we're still connected, and we still try to find ways to connect with one another. And I think that's something that's really beautiful about how people and humans are, kind of, because even if we can't really see each other in person, we still find all the ways that we can somehow connect. And it's just made some of my friendships even stronger than before. Even though we can't really go out as much, it kind of just shows you who really cares for you and who's really there to support you in times of trouble. And I think that's something great that's come out of this.
Very good. Jason and then Peter.
I think for a lot of teachers and myself, it's an appreciation, and students included, it's an appreciation for being at school and having those engagements. We're really missing it, and I think when we come back, there's going to be a huge appreciation for that environment. But also, I think through all this, we've learned so much about what we do as teachers and so much of what we do as administrators and students, and we've got more tools in our toolbox now. And when we do come back and we're in person, I don't think some of the stuff we're doing now is going to go away. I think it's just going to, all it's going to do is further enhance what we already were doing earlier. So I think we're learning a ton right now. So
Very good.
So just first, to follow on from what Jason and Michael said, I've been doing technology my whole life, building a lot of these enabling pieces. And the frustration has been, when is it all going to happen? And this, in a way, ironically, the dreams just happen. But that's really just the side note. Really, the big takeaway for us is that I think during this time when everything got reshuffled, we didn't do things because a lot of things that just kept us busy. We went to these places, we did these things because they were part of a routine. And now we got a chance to step back and say, you couldn't do a lot of things. So we have to make a lot of choices and say, what's really important for us to do, both in terms of time, but in terms of risk assessment. Is this worth taking the risk? I have a daughter that's going off to college, and she chose to actually go in person. These are decisions you make. What's really important to you? And then you do I think we do a lot fewer things, but we do them deliberately, knowing what they mean to us. And I think that's something that I take away as, unfortunately, haven't had the time to do that until this happened. And that's a big, big takeaway for us.
Very good. Polly.
Wow, I love everything everybody said. I just want to say that, especially Peter and Jason and Juan. I really appreciate it. Mike too, all of you. I think the silver lining for us is that we're all here having this conversation and that it's not new. So I've had an opportunity to interact with many of the people on this panel in an ongoing way that I would not have done if we weren't facing this crisis. And so what we've learned is what we've always said, but we haven't learned as keenly as we do when we get to experience it, is we're better together. And I think we're better when we're not distracted by other things and really can focus on what's important. We have one schedule in our district. I'm just going to say this as an example. That sounds like a simple thing, one school schedule in a district. That has been something we've been trying to accomplish for how long, Jason? 25 years? 20 years for sure. And it happened because of this crisis, because we said, just make it one schedule. It wasn't that we all came together and said, oh, this is the right thing to do. It was that we realized that it wasn't as important as some of the other things, but it was critical to have us all work together. And that has been enormous. So I think it's this uniting and focusing that you're hearing from everybody. And it's the collaboration we're having with people like the League of Women Voters and students and staff on this call and parents. It's pretty powerful.
You know, I'm going to ask the question of myself, even though I have no horse in the race, no kids in the schools. But the thing that I've heard as a result of preparing for this is a renewed appreciation for teachers and what they do, because families have started to be teachers. Families now understand the complexity of that role, the value that it provided, and the value that they lost when it wasn't the way it was. So I say hats off to the teachers and that appreciation in the community that has risen as a result of this. Now with that, sadly, we are out of time, but not even close to out of questions. So I want to thank all the panelists. Elaine is going to join us again and just do a quick close. But thank you all so very much. You've been very generous with your time and both helping me prepare to put this on and appearing this evening.
Thank you.
Yes, I want to reiterate what Tracy said. Thank you so much. That was such an outstanding job from all of the panelists and so heartwarming. You know, the takeaway is really education is such an important part of our society and our community. And the collaboration of everyone working together is just, it's quite inspiring. So thank you for all of your efforts. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you for your time. And we want to take a moment and thank the audience as well. Thank you so much for coming. We hope you'll share the link. I'm going to do a quick plug for voting because we're once again in that election, if I may. On the next screen, just reminder, the election day is November 3rd. Make sure you vote on or before, especially if you're going to mail in that ballot, get it in there early enough. You know, just make sure you take an active role in democracy. It is not something that you can just say, oh, I don't need to vote. I don't need to worry about it. It takes every one of us to make our democracy work. So if you loved this forum, we're just going to tell you we've got more candidate forums. We've got an explanation of the ballot measures, the pros and the cons. All of these are coming out. They'll be on our website at LWVCS.org. Their link to this recording will also be at our website. If you go into the calendar and look for this event, you'll be able to see it. So that is all we have. Thank you again, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.